This is the dramatic and moving story of a family in Baltimore, Maryland, where a shocking event leads to a young woman's pregnancy and her 60-year-old father-in-law helps her through the journey of childbirth. Before we begin, please subscribe and like our channel. It is a great source of strength for us. Baltimore, Maryland. A historic city where the Patapsco River, a lifeblood like a mother's embrace, wraps around the city's heart, its waters flowing silently for centuries. Grand historic buildings and charming row houses line the streets, while down below, old cobblestone alleyways in neighborhoods like Fells Point seem to hold the faint breath of a bygone era. It was on a sunny hill in a quiet, friendly part of the city, in a neighborhood called Hampton, that a single charming old row house stood. And there lived a family of three, creating a scene more beautiful and warm than any famous painting. There was Jack Sullivan, his wife Emily, and Jack's father Arthur, who was more of a true father to Emily than just a father-in-law. Their life was as cozy as a warm blanket in spring, as rich as the autumn harvest, and as warm as a fireplace on a winter's night. Jack and Emily were a love story destined to be, having grown up on the same street, sharing everything from their scraped-knee childhoods to the shining moments of their youth. The back seat of Jack's beat-up bicycle was always reserved for little Emily, and he treated the slightly burnt cookies she made with her clumsy hands as the most delicious snack in the world, appointing himself her loyal knight. Time passed. The boy and girl became young adults, and their friendship ripened into a heart-fluttering love. They shared the romance of their college campus days, encouraged each other through the struggles of finding jobs, and finally, with the blessings of many, they exchanged their vows. Their love, deep enough to read the universe in each other's eyes and hear the heart's voice even in silence, had only deepened and clarified as it crossed the river of time. Jack had lost his mother to illness when he was too young to remember. Afterward, his father Arthur raised his son alone, playing the role of both mother and father. Arthur, who had taught at a local Baltimore public school for over 30 years, was a man who showered his son with boundless love and wisdom. He constantly encouraged his son to be brave and instilled in him a strong moral compass so he could stand tall against any prejudice. Under his gentle guidance, Jack grew into a young man with a clear and upright soul. His father's broad back was the strongest mountain in his world, and his father's warm smile was the brightest sun that lit up his life. To live with and care for such a father for the rest of his life, to repay that deep love, this was Jack's most important wish and a duty he cherished. He lived every moment grateful for how safe and rich his life was under the shade of the great tree that was his father. For Emily, the idea of family had always been a heart-achingly distant dream. Abandoned at birth by parents, she never knew she spent her childhood in a quiet group home on the outskirts of the city. When other kids went on picnics holding their parents' hands, she could only watch from behind a worn-out window, swallowing her tears alone. But she refused to trap herself in the shadow of despair. Instead, she worked several times harder than anyone else. At night, she read books in the dim light of the hallway in the quieted home, and during the day she worked all sorts of part-time jobs to pay for her education. With her natural intelligence and fierce determination, she got into a prestigious university, and after graduating, found a fulfilling life, working for a well-known local nonprofit, helping others who, like her, had been marginalized. Though she had built a life for herself with her own strength, a corner of her heart still held an unquenchable loneliness and a deep yearning for family, like a spring that never ran dry. Into her arid life, Jack and Arthur Sullivan arrived like a welcome rain. Jack was the kindest lover and most reliable friend she could ever imagine, warmly embracing her painful past and her shadowed inner world. And Arthur was the very picture of the ideal father she had only ever dreamed of. The first day she went to meet him, Emily was so nervous she could barely lift her head. Arthur didn't ask a single question. He just smiled warmly and said, "Welcome, my dear. It must have been a long journey to get here. From now on, this is your home, and I am your father." That single sentence was like magic, instantly melting away the emotional burden Emily had carried her entire life. Arthur never once showed prejudice or discrimination because of her background. If anything, he cherished and cared for her as if she were the daughter he never had. Emily, in turn, called him Dad and relied on him with all her heart as if he were her own father. To her, Arthur wasn't just a father-in-law. He was the father who had taken her in when she was lost, the mentor who held her steady whenever she wavered, and her staunchest ally in the world. After Jack and Emily married, the life of the three of them began anew in the old row house in Hampton. It was a place filled with memories, a home that Arthur and his late wife had lovingly tended in their younger years. Though it wasn't as convenient as a modern apartment, it was filled with the pleasant smells of earth and grass, and the gentle sound of wind chimes hanging from the eaves was beautiful. Opening the front door revealed a small, welcoming backyard. On one side, a vegetable garden that Arthur diligently tended added a touch of vibrant green. Lettuce, peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, the sight of different vegetables growing with the seasons, was a rich symphony of life in itself. In the middle of the yard stood a large, majestic oak tree, easily over 100 years old, offering a different scene with each season. In spring, it sprouted light green buds. In summer, its lush leaves provided cool shade. And in autumn, it was adorned with brilliant orange and red leaves, enriching the hearts of all who saw it. The house was always kept neat and tidy. The air was filled with the fragrant aroma of the fresh brewed coffee Arthur made every morning, and the savory smell of the dinner Emily carefully prepared each evening. But above all, the house overflowed with a warm energy created by the blend of Jack's cheerful jokes, Emily's bright laughter, and Arthur's kind stories. On weekends, the three of them would hold hands and ride bikes along the trail by the Patapsco River or walk along the historic waterfront, enjoying the classic Baltimore scenery. In the evenings, they would gather on the back porch, sipping on wine or a local craft beer. Arthur had picked up unwinding from the day and listening to each other's stories. In this simple yet fulfilling daily life, Emily felt for the first time ever a sense of perfect happiness and deep belonging. She was no longer a lonely reed adrift in the world. Her roots were now planted deep in the sturdy earth of Jack and Arthur. She prayed and prayed with her hands clasped together, hoping this happiness would never break, that it would never run away. But as the saying goes, the deeper the happiness, the darker the shadow of misfortune can be. Cruel fate was already holding its breath, waiting just outside their door. The company Jack worked for, Chesapeake Construction, was a sizable mid-tier construction firm that had grown out of the Baltimore area. There, despite his young age, Jack was quickly recognized for his outstanding work ethic, sense of responsibility, and a unique charm that drew people to him. The company's founder, Mr. Thompson, had recognized Jack's potential early on, showing him exceptional trust by appointing him as a lead site manager on important projects. Jack, in turn, worked day and night, doing his best to live up to Mr. Thompson's expectations. That day, too, Jack was busy from early in the morning, conducting a final inspection of the safety systems at a new large-scale apartment complex construction site. "For dinner tonight, you can pick whatever you want, Em, but make it something delicious. Dad and I are going to have a long day," he said with a wink as he headed out the door, his words a testament to his positive energy. Emily gave his tie a final adjustment and left a quick, "be safe" kiss on his lips. Arthur followed him out to the front steps, patting his son firmly on the shoulder. "Be careful, son. Always be careful." No one could have imagined that this would be the last time they would see their beloved Jack, healthy and full of life. The lazy lunch hour passed, and the afternoon work began. An urgent phone call rang at Emily's office. The words, "Johns Hopkins Hospital Emergency Room," made her heart plummet to the floor. The voice on the other end of the line was trembling, and the news was devastating. At the construction site where Jack was working, a tower crane had lost its balance and toppled over, crashing down on Jack as he was passing below. He had been struck directly in the head by the massive steel structure and was now unconscious and undergoing emergency surgery. Emily froze on the spot. All the sounds of the world disappeared, and it seemed she could only hear the frantic, deafening beat of her own heart. The stack of papers in her hand fell silently to the floor, and her vision went black. A colleague next to her tapped her on the back, asking if she was okay, but she couldn't answer. Arthur, who was watering his garden, felt the sky come crashing down when he received his daughter-in-law's frantic screaming call. The watering can in his hand dropped to the ground, and his legs trembled so violently he felt he would collapse. He had spent his entire life in education and had never lost his composure in any crisis, but in the face of the horrific tragedy that had befallen his son, he was helpless. His face pale as a sheet, he stared blankly into space for a moment. But then he snapped back to reality. This was not the time to grieve. If he fell apart, what would happen to Emily? And to Jack? With trembling hands, he quickly threw on a jacket and rushed to Emily's office. Finding his daughter-in-law in a state of shock, barely able to walk, he said nothing, simply supported her frail shoulders and helped her into a taxi. Throughout the ride to the hospital, only the sound of their choked, silent sobs hung heavily in the back seat. Arthur's large, wrinkled hand held Emily's trembling one tightly, but even that warmth couldn't chase away the deep despair and fear that seemed to penetrate their very souls. The hospital emergency room was a scene of chaos. The stunned faces of Jack's colleagues, who had rushed over the urgent footsteps of the medical staff, hurrying back and forth, and the sounds of weeping from all around mixed together to create a living hell. The agonizing wait stretched on and on. Finally, the operating room doors opened and the exhausted surgeon emerged. His expression was grim, and the words that came out of his mouth were cruelly hopeless. A complex skull fracture, severe brain swelling, and extensive cerebral hemorrhage. They had performed the surgery, but they couldn't guarantee the prognosis. Even if he survived, the chance of regaining consciousness was almost zero. The most likely outcome was a permanent vegetative state. It was a diagnosis tantamount to a death sentence. The moment she heard those words, Emily finally fainted and collapsed. Arthur could only lean against the wall, his eyes empty as he stared into space. The doctor's words echoed in his ears, but he couldn't properly process any of it. He felt trapped in a nightmare, not reality. Just then, the CEO of Chesapeake Construction, Mr. Thompson, appeared with a few assistants, looking as if he had rushed over upon hearing the news. He hurried towards Arthur, grabbing his hand with an exaggerated gesture of sympathy. "Oh, Mr. Sullivan, what a terrible, terrible tragedy. For Jack, our company's brightest star, to suffer such a terrible accident. My heart is just breaking. We will take full moral responsibility as a company. Please don't worry about the medical bills at all, and if there is anything you need, please tell me directly at any time." His voice was slick as oil, and his expression looked genuinely sad. But Arthur, through his crocodile tears, faintly detected a cold glint of calculation and greed that flashed for just a moment. His intuition, honed by a lifetime of dealing with the pure souls of children, was not wrong. Jack was eventually moved to the cold bed of the intensive care unit. His young, healthy body was now barely breathing, dependent on all sorts of life support machines. His head was wrapped in thick bandages, and his face was so swollen and pale he was almost unrecognizable. He looked like a wax figure drained of all the warmth of life. Arthur visited the ICU every single day. His silhouette, as he stared endlessly at his son through the glass window, looked incredibly lonely and fragile. When visiting hours began, he would invariably go to his son's side, hold his lifeless hand, and talk to him endlessly. "Jack, can you hear me? It's your dad. The wind is pretty chilly today. I was so worried you might catch a cold that I couldn't sleep." He would hum old songs his son liked, or recount funny memories from his childhood, all in the desperate hope that it might create even a small ripple in his son's injured consciousness. Emily, too, without even taking time to recover herself, visited the hospital every day to stay by her husband's side. She would whisper in Jack's ear, "I love you. Please come back," her pleas mixed with tears. But despite their desperate calls, Jack gave no response. Time slipped away like sand in an hourglass, and their hope flickered like an increasingly thin and fragile candle flame. Then, one evening, Emily, who had been feeling unwell for a few days, had a thought. Could she be pregnant? She bought a pregnancy test from the pharmacy. When she cautiously checked the result, 2 clear lines appeared. Pregnancy. It was the blessing she and Jack had waited for so long, but in this moment it crushed her with a weight of despair she couldn't bear. Caught between the joy of the life growing inside her and the extreme fear of losing her husband, she was lost and adrift. It would have been better if I didn't know. Faced with this cruel twist of fate, she sobbed in agony alone. After several days of suffering in silence, she finally gathered the courage to tell her father-in-law. She didn't have the confidence to say it while looking him in the face, so she kept her head down and confessed in a small voice. "Dad, I have something to tell you. I think I'm pregnant. It's Jack's baby." Hearing his daughter-in-law's trembling voice, Arthur held his breath for a moment. A storm of emotions raged within his chest. Sorrow for his son, pity for his daughter-in-law, and shock and bewilderment at this unexpected new life. He closed his eyes with a deep sigh. But then he opened them and gripped Emily's shoulders firmly. His eyes, which had been filled with sadness and despair, were now blazing with a kind of tragic resolve. "Emily, yes. If this is heaven's will, then we must accept it. No, we must protect it. This child is the only sign of hope Jack has left in this world, and the reason we must go on living. If I collapse now, what will become of this fragile life? And my son, your husband Jack, he would never leave us so meaninglessly. If his father and his wife believe and wait for him, he will absolutely return to us. So from now on, you must be even stronger. Put away your tears for a while and be tough. If we stand strong, the baby in your womb will grow strong, and Jack will draw strength from that powerful life force and rise again. From now on, I, this old man, will bet everything I have left to protect you, the baby in your womb, and Jack. So you don't worry about anything. Just prepare to be the bravest and wisest mother in the world. Do you understand?" Arthur's voice was low and quiet, but the weight and sincerity within it struck Emily's heart like thunder. His words were like the North Star showing her the way forward when she had been lost and wandering in deep darkness. Emily looked into her father-in-law's deep, warm eyes and cried endlessly. But these were no longer tears of despair or sadness. They were tears of a promise of resilient hope, blooming even in hardship, tears of deep trust and gratitude for each other's existence. Just then, the nosy neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who was passing by in the hospital corridor, happened to overhear them. Wondering what was going on, she lingered for a moment and vaguely caught on to the fact that Emily was pregnant. A strange smile, a mix of scorn and curiosity, played on her lips. She decided she would watch with great interest what would happen to this family. Meanwhile, Arthur and Emily held each other's hands even tighter. A thorny path still lay before them, but now they were not alone. They had a life to protect, and they had each other to lean on. And in their hearts, a small ember named Hope was beginning to glow again. After that day's promise, Arthur's life transformed into something akin to a monk's. All his thoughts and actions were focused on only 3 things: his son in the hospital, his pregnant daughter-in-law, and his grandchild in her womb. His personal grief and exhaustion were of no concern. He no longer even allowed himself the right to be weak. His day invariably began before dawn with a walk through the quiet trails of a nearby park. Cutting through the clear, cool morning air, he would find a secluded bench, and with a reverent heart, he would offer a silent, fervent prayer. His back, slightly stooped with the weight of years, held a prayer more desperate and powerful than that of any young man. Please God, please watch over my son Jack, and please grant health and peace to my daughter-in-law Emily and the baby in her womb. His low murmur, like a plea for his words to be carried on the morning mist to God's ears, echoed with sorrow. After his prayer, his forehead would be beaded with sweat, but his steps on the way back were light and firm. The ember of hope he carried in his heart was warming his entire body. Returning home, he would head straight for the kitchen. For his daughter-in-law, who had no appetite and no energy due to her pregnancy, he devised a new menu every morning. His cooking skills were clumsy, learned over his wife's shoulder in his younger years, but his love for his daughter-in-law was deeper and more refined than any master chef's. He would stay up late poring over thick pregnancy cookbooks borrowed from the local library, preparing Arthur's healthy table, considering nutrition, taste, and even digestion. He made his own ginger tea to help with morning sickness, prepared side dishes with spinach or beef for iron, and simmered clear broths with calcium-rich ingredients for the baby's bone growth. Every time Emily would protest guiltily, "Dad, you're going to wear yourself out. I can take care of myself." But Arthur would wave it off. "What else is this old man good for? You just eat well and stay healthy for our little Hope," he said, using the nickname they had given the baby, comforting his daughter-in-law instead. Perhaps his devotion reached the heavens. Emily gradually regained her appetite, and under his warm care, she safely passed through the unstable early stages of her pregnancy. After spending the morning caring for his daughter-in-law and future grandchild, he would head to the hospital where Jack was after lunch. ICU visits were still limited to 2 short periods a day, but he never missed a single day, a single visit. Even as he felt his heart ache at the sight of his son through the glass, he would force a calm expression and enter the room. He would take his unresponsive son's warm hand and speak to him gently, as if he could hear everything. "Jack, Dad's here. It's gotten pretty warm today. The magnolias you love are in full bloom in the hospital garden. You have to wake up soon and see them with your own eyes." He would open a family photo album he brought from home, recounting happy memories one by one, and he would place the ultrasound photo of the baby that Emily had sent into his son's hand, talking about their new hope. "See, Jack, your child is growing so well. The doctor says it's likely a very healthy baby girl. You have to wake up soon to name our daughter and buy her pretty clothes, don't you?" He would play music his son used to enjoy on a small portable player, or sometimes read a passage from a poem or novel that had moved him. His voice was always calm, but within it an absolute belief that his son would awaken, and a love that refused to give up flowed like a river. Arthur's devoted efforts stirred a quiet admiration within the hospital. A veteran nurse, Brenda, who had been watching over Jack for a long time, felt a deep respect for the old gentleman who never lost hope while staying by his son's side every day. Whenever she saw Arthur, she would offer sincere encouragement and comfort. "Mr. Sullivan, are you eating properly? You mustn't overdo it. Jack's color looks a little better today than yesterday. A good day will surely come." Sometimes when Arthur stepped away for a moment, she would whisper in Jack's ear, "Jack, your father and wife are wearing themselves out for you. Be strong." Her warm human kindness was a great source of strength for Arthur. But the world is not only filled with good people. As time went on, the CEO of Chesapeake Construction, Mr. Thompson, began to show his true colors. Using the company's financial difficulties as an excuse, he repeatedly postponed the promised medical expense support. He cleverly distorted the accident investigation results to create a public narrative that Jack was largely at fault, He even went so far as to have his lawyer contact Arthur with a shameless threat. "We are willing to pay a small amount of compensation out of moral consideration, but we do not admit legal liability. If you do not accept this offer and continue to raise issues, we may even demand the return of the medical expenses provided so far." For Arthur, who had lived an honest and upright life, Mr. Thompson's attitude was an unbearable insult and betrayal. He wanted to run over and grab him by the collar, but with his son's life on the line, he couldn't act rashly. Late at night, he would sit alone on his porch, sipping a bitter glass of whiskey to soothe his troubled heart. The first to notice Arthur's anguish was his old friend and former colleague, Mr. Henderson. One day, he came to visit Arthur, and over a glass of beer, he listened to what was in his heart. Then, furious, as if it were his own problem, he said, "Listen, Arthur, trying to fight a vicious corporate shark like that on your own is like throwing an egg at a rock. I have a nephew who's a lawyer. Let me introduce you. And let's let our old teachers' union colleagues know about this and gather support. We can't let a man like you, who dedicated his whole life to true education, suffer such an injustice." Mr. Henderson's active help and encouragement gave Arthur the courage to fight again. Furthermore, Jack's direct subordinate, a young engineer named David, who was at the scene of the accident, had been silent out of fear of company pressure and repercussions. But unable to bear his guilty conscience, he finally contacted Arthur secretly. He promised to testify that the crane's safety inspection had not been properly conducted on the day of the accident, and that Mr. Thompson had frequently ordered cuts to safety costs. His courageous whistleblowing could become crucial evidence in the potential legal battle to come. Thus, while the walls of reality were still high and steep, Arthur never lost hope. In fact, he poured even more devotion into what he called hopeful prenatal care for his daughter-in-law, Emily, and his grandchild. Every evening after dinner, he and Emily would walk along the path by the river near their house. Looking at the sunset-tinged water, he would speak gently to the baby in the womb. "Hope, can you hear Grandpa's voice? The sunset is so beautiful. When you're born, you'll walk this path with Grandpa too." He helped Emily find peace of mind by reading her beautiful poems or listening to calm classical music together. On weekends, he would try to instill good energy into the fetus by taking her to historic sites or beautiful parks. In the midst of his unwavering love and devotion, Emily gradually overcame the instability of her late-term pregnancy and calmly prepared to become a mother. Of course, there were days when she cried, overcome by longing for her husband and anxiety about the future, but whenever that happened, she would rely on the powerful kicks of the baby in her womb and the presence of her father-in-law, who stood steadfastly by her side, and pull herself together. She firmly believed that at the end of this ordeal, happiness was surely waiting. About a month before her due date, a very small but astonishing change began to be detected in Jack's condition. While Nurse Brenda was giving Jack his regular sponge bath, she repeated the words Arthur always whispered in his ear. "Hope is waiting for you, Daddy." At that moment, a single tear rolled down from the corner of Jack's eye. Brenda was startled and immediately informed Arthur. When Arthur and Emily heard the news, they hugged each other and cried tears of joy. Although he was still medically unconscious, they were certain. Jack can hear us. He can feel us. It was proof that their love and patience were finally slowly knocking on the door of his closed consciousness. Would a miracle truly come? At the end of a long, deep, dark tunnel was a single ray of light finally beginning to appear in the face of a father's desperate promise, a wife's heart-wrenching wait, and the wondrous power of a new life about to be born. Jack's time, which had seemed to stop, was beginning to move again very slowly, but definitely. Finally, the fateful day dawned. A little earlier than her due date, Emily began to feel contractions in the early morning. Arthur, who had been watching over his daughter-in-law all night without sleep, grabbed the pre-packed hospital bag, and calmly but urgently helped Emily into the car. In the car on the way to the hospital, Emily groaned from the overwhelming pain, but tried her best to remain calm. In the driver's seat, Arthur's heart was in turmoil, pulled in 1,000 directions. The excitement and anticipation of meeting his granddaughter, who would soon enter the world, clashed with the piercing grief and sorrow for his son, who couldn't share in this joy. He kept checking his daughter-in-law's pale, pained face in the rearview mirror and encouraged her in a trembling voice. "Emily, we're almost there. Just hold on a little longer. I'll be right by your side, so don't worry about anything. Just focus on a safe delivery." His voice carried a deep sense of stability that came from a lifetime of experience and an infinite trust in his daughter-in-law. Even in her pain, Emily seemed to draw great strength from his warm words, nodding firmly and gripping his hand tightly. As soon as they arrived at the hospital, Emily was moved to a delivery room and labor began in earnest. Arthur paced anxiously in front of the delivery room door, checking the time again and again. His old friend Mr. Henderson also rushed to the hospital early in the morning, standing by his side and silently patting his shoulder. As time passed, the sounds of Emily's pained screams from inside the delivery room grew more desperate, and hearing them, Arthur's heart felt as if it were being cut by a sharp knife. Unable to stand still, he went to the window at the end of the hall. The fresh air of the early morning flowed in through the window, but his heart was still as turbulent and precarious as a stormy sea at night. He clasped his hands together in prayer. "Please, please let my daughter-in-law and grandchild be okay. And please grant me the miracle of being able to share this moment of joy and emotion with my son in his coma." How much time had passed? Finally, a powerful baby's cry, as if to shake the whole world, erupted from beyond the delivery room door. At that moment, all the strength drained from Arthur's body, and he slumped against the hallway wall. Hot tears poured from his eyes. Mr. Henderson, standing next to him, clapped him hard on the back and shouted, "You did it, Arthur! Your daughter-in-law! No, you did it! I'm so proud of you!" Arthur couldn't say anything, just sobbed like a child, his shoulders shaking. A moment later, Nurse Brenda, dressed in a white coat, opened the door with a bright smile. In her arms was a small, beautiful baby. "Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan. A very healthy and beautiful baby girl. The mother is doing very well, too." Arthur pulled out a handkerchief with a trembling hand, wiped his tears, and managed to stand up. Brenda carefully placed the baby in his arms. The warmth of the tiny but vibrant life seeped deep into his chest. A new life, a precious granddaughter who carried his blood, his son Jack's own flesh and blood. With trembling lips, he called the baby's name. "Hope, our little Hope. It's Grandpa. Welcome to the world." As if responding to her grandfather's voice, newborn Hope seemed to stop crying for a moment, and her small eyes fluttered open. In that instant, Arthur felt an overwhelming emotion and happiness that he wouldn't trade for anything in the world. But right at that moment, Arthur's cell phone began to ring loudly. The caller ID was the ICU where Jack was hospitalized. A mix of ominous premonition and faint hope crossed his mind as he answered the phone with a trembling hand. On the other end, he heard the excited, unrestrained voice of the attending physician. "Mr. Sullivan, you need to come to the ICU right now. Jack just opened his eyes. I think he's regained consciousness." Hearing those words, Arthur couldn't believe his ears. My son woke up. At this very moment when his daughter Hope was born. He was so shocked he couldn't speak, just held his breath for a moment. Mr. Henderson and Nurse Brenda, standing beside him, also looked at him with expressions of disbelief. Arthur carefully handed Hope, who was still in his arms, to Nurse Brenda, and then, like a young man again, ran like the wind towards the ICU. His heart was pounding as if it would burst, and tears of joy and emotion flowed endlessly from his eyes. The moment he opened the door to the ICU, Arthur couldn't believe the scene unfolding before him. His son Jack, who had lain motionless for so long, was now propped up slightly on his bed, his eyes faintly, but clearly, open, looking at him. His gaze was not yet fully focused, but what was in his eyes was undoubtedly the consciousness of a living person. Arthur staggered to his son's bedside and took his hand. "Jack, my son, are you with me? Have you really woken up?" His voice calling his son's name was shaking violently with emotion. Jack seemed to nod slowly, and his dry lips moved with effort. The sound was very small and cracked, but it was clearly the sound of him calling for his father. "Dad!" At that single word, Arthur finally broke down, hugging his son and crying his heart out like a small child. It was as if the father's tears had opened the tightly shut door of his son's heart and, like a miracle, called his soul back to the world. This unbelievable news was immediately conveyed to Emily. Despite the pain and exhaustion of childbirth, she tried to get up at the news that her husband was awake. She got into a wheelchair, still recovering, and holding her newborn daughter Hope in her arms, she went to her husband. At the door of his room, she hesitated for a moment. What if it's a dream? What if I open the door and my husband is lying there like before? Fear gripped her. But she quickly gathered her courage and opened the door. And there, waiting for her, was her husband Jack, awake, the man she had missed and waited for so long. His eyes were still hazy, but when he saw his wife and daughter, the warmest, most gentle smile spread across his face. "Emily," he said, his voice weak as he called his wife's name. Emily couldn't hold back any longer. Holding their daughter, she rushed to his side and fell into his embrace. "Jack! Oh, Jack, thank you for coming back. Thank you so much." Her sobs filled the room, and Jack too patted his wife's back and shed hot tears. Hope, meeting her father for the first time, seemed to sense something in her parents' embrace. She fussed for a moment, and then fell peacefully asleep. The three of them stayed like that for a long time, sharing each other's warmth, savoring with all their hearts this precious moment of reunion that had come like a miracle. Watching all this from the side, Arthur, Mr. Henderson, and Nurse Brenda silently wiped away their own tears, humbled before this great miracle created by human love and will. A father's desperate promise, a wife's tearful wait, and the wondrous power of a new life's birth had finally awakened a soul that had been lost in a deep sleep. Their tears were no longer tears of sadness or despair. They were the most beautiful and precious tears of joy in the world, a blessing for the hopeful morning they had finally reached together after overcoming all hardships. Jack's recovery process was as surprising and miraculous as its beginning. Having been bedridden for over a year, his muscles were as weak as paper, and some of his memories were hazy, like fog due to the horrific shock of the accident. But his spirit and will to live were stronger than any steel. He was determined to return to his former healthy self for his father, who had sacrificed everything for him, for his wife, who had devotedly stayed by his side, and for his lovely daughter Hope, who had brought him back to the light of the world. He endured the painful and tedious daily rehabilitation process without a single complaint or sign of weakness, instead facing it with a bright and positive attitude. At first, even wiggling a finger was a struggle, but with the constant encouragement and support of his father and wife, he showed superhuman willpower. With the help of a physical therapist, he practiced moving his stiff limbs, and with the guidance of a speech therapist, he repeatedly practiced words and sentences. His forehead was always beaded with sweat, but his eyes sparkled with hope. His body recovered at an astonishing rate day by day. Within a few weeks, he could lift a spoon to eat on his own, and a few months later, he could walk short distances with the help of a walker. His hazy memories also began to clear up, and especially the precious memories shared with his family came back as vividly as if they had happened yesterday. He held his father's wrinkled hand and atoned with tears. "Dad, please forgive your unworthy son. If it weren't for your deep love and sacrifice, I wouldn't be here. I will live the rest of my life for you." And looking into his wife's eyes, he confessed with all his heart, "Emily, I can't even imagine how lonely and hard it must have been for you while I was gone. I'm so sorry, and thank you, and I love you more than anyone in the world. From now on, I will be a strong pillar for you and Hope. I will live my life only for you." The sight of him holding his daughter Hope in his arms was clumsy, but was the very picture of the most affectionate and happy father in the world. He held Hope's small hand, listened to her babbling, and soaked in a deep sense of happiness, as if being compensated for the lost time. The news that Jack had miraculously regained consciousness and was recovering at a rapid pace became a major topic of conversation in the Baltimore community. The local newspaper and TV stations vied to report his story, and many people cheered for his recovery. In this social climate, the CEO of Chesapeake Construction, Mr. Thompson, could no longer evade his responsibility. In particular, the whistleblower's testimony and the active pressure from local figures like Mr. Henderson put him in a tight spot. Ultimately, Mr. Thompson visited Arthur in person, admitted his past wrongdoings, and deeply apologized. He promised to cover all of Jack's medical expenses and to pay a substantial compensation that far exceeded legal standards. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had spread malicious rumors and tormented the family, couldn't stand the cold glares and criticism from the neighborhood and quietly moved away like a thief in the night. Just as the ground hardens after the rain, a just outcome and a time of peace finally came to the family that had overcome all sorts of trials and tribulations. The day Jack finally completed all his treatment and returned home healthy, the old row house in Hampton was filled with a vibrant joy it hadn't seen in a long time, as if it were a huge celebration. Arthur prepared a lavish welcome feast with all of his son's favorite foods, the table groaning under the weight. Emily decorated the house with Jack's favorite flowers, her heart fluttering as she waited for him. Old friends like Mr. Henderson neighbors, who had shared their warm hearts, and even Nurse Brenda, all gathered in one place to sincerely celebrate Jack's miraculous return. Jack bowed his head to each person who had cried and prayed for him, thanking them and shedding tears of overwhelming emotion once again. He was no longer a patient in a hospital bed. He was the healthy and strong head of the household who had proudly returned to the embrace of his loving family and neighbors. From that day on, the life of the family of four, Arthur, Emily, Jack, and Hope, fully returned to the peaceful and happy routine of before, as if the long-stopped hands of a clock had been wound again. Perhaps their time flowed even more richly now, in a love and gratitude that had become much deeper and stronger. The house was always filled with Hope's clear, bubbling laughter. Jack's strong voice, Emily's low and affectionate stories, and the warm gaze of Arthur watching over it all with a gentle smile. Jack never for a moment forgot his father's noble sacrifice and love. He firmly resolved that just as his father had dedicated his life to raising him, it was now his turn to protect his father. He took over the tough chores around the house and even the gardening so his father could enjoy a comfortable retirement. On weekends, he would take his father to scenic spots around Maryland, strengthening the bond between father and son, Emily. Through the two greatest gifts of her life, her husband's miraculous recovery and the birth of her lovely daughter, was reborn as a more mature and wise woman. She returned to her job at the nonprofit, giving hope and courage to her neighbors in need, while at the same time leading her family with warmth and stability as a loving wife and wise mother. Arthur now entrusted everything to his son and daughter-in-law, taking a step back to watch their happiness with a contented smile. The greatest joy in his life was watching his granddaughter Hope grow a child so precious she wouldn't hurt even if she were in his eye. He would let Hope sit on his lap and tell her old stories, or they would draw pictures and plant flowers in the yard together, enjoying the happiness of being the most affectionate and kind grandfather in the world. Time passed, and before they knew it, Hope was celebrating her first birthday. All the grateful people who had been a source of strength for the family gathered again for a simple but meaningful party to celebrate Hope's first year. In front of a beautifully decorated birthday table, Hope, bathed in the attention and love of many, smiled brightly. When it was time for the birthday grab, a playful tradition they'd adopted, everyone's expectant gaze was on Hope. On the table were various items: a ball of yarn for a long life, a dollar bill for wealth, a pen and paper for scholarship, and a small wooden hammer that Grandpa Arthur had carved himself. Hope rolled her big round eyes for a moment, as if hesitating, then, without a second thought, her small hand grabbed the worn-out storybook that her grandfather always read to her. "Wow, looks like our Hope is going to be a scholar!" everyone exclaimed, bursting into laughter, and applause sincerely blessing Hope's future to be filled with wisdom and intelligence. Jack lifted his daughter high up towards the ceiling and exclaimed, "My daughter, grow up to be brave, like your dad, wise, like your mom, and warm-hearted, like your grandpa." Hope nestled in his arms, let out a delighted squeal, and hugged his neck tightly, as if she understood his words. Watching this scene, Emily and Arthur's eyes once again glistened with tears of emotion. These were not tears of pain for past trials, but tears of gratitude and joy for this brilliant happiness they had finally achieved together after overcoming all adversity. That night, the whole family sat side by side on the back porch, gazing at the bright full moon and the twinkling stars. Arthur, with his sleeping granddaughter on his lap, said softly with a serene smile, "Life is truly an unpredictable journey. Yesterday we were lost and wandering in pitch-black darkness, and today we are all laughing together under this bright moonlight. Looking back, it was a long and arduous time, but through it we learned one clear truth, and that is, no matter how deep and dark the night of despair, if you hold tight to the lamp of love and faith in each other and firmly grip the staff of hope, you can always greet a brilliant new dawn." At his calm but deeply resonant words, Jack and Emily nodded quietly. Over the past year, they had comforted each other's wounds and leaned on each other, learning firsthand the amazing power and greatness of the word together. In Baltimore, Maryland, over the gentle waves of the Patapsco River, a song of warm love and happiness continues to echo softly today. It is a miraculous story that bloomed on the edge of despair's cliff, a moving epic of victory woven from a father's noble and tearful sacrifice and the unshakable faith of a family that rose again on the foundation of that sacrifice. Their bond, forged deeper and stronger by weathering the storms of hardship together, shines more brilliantly than any jewel in the world. Just as the waters of the river flow eternally without running dry, their love and happiness will also remain unchanged in the storms of time, continuing forever. And their story, reminding us all of the true meaning of family and the great miracles that human love and will can create, will live on forever in our hearts with a long, lingering echo. Thank you for watching today. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and like.